Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are tuning in to the Brahma Viharas video series, the Lovingkindness chapter. And this today's session will conclude the first week, which I covered loving kindness for the self. Now, interestingly enough, I'm having some technical difficulties. If you're watching this on the New Life Foundation page or on my Such Sweet Thunder page, I'm not sure why, but my browser is not supporting the Facebook Live today. So I'll be sharing those from my Facebook page later. So sorry about that, my deepest apologies. I, on that note, would like to say my thank yous to New Life Foundation. I'm actually here at the foundation in Chiang Rai in northern Thailand right now. There's only 8 of us here. It's kind of a skeleton crew. But we are working vigorously to get the place reopened and better than ever. So hope in your travels you will come visit us when we do reopen. Come and get your Zen on with me and enjoy the grounds here. The farm is amazing. I just had a plate full of fresh papaya picked right from the garden. Beautiful. It is a lovely community up here. Spend a couple of weeks or a month recharging, meditating, and just getting in touch. So that being said, today is a Q&A session. And so I'm just going to ring the bell and I will guide us into silence, just briefly into silence, and then I'm going to jump into some of these questions. I got a bunch of interesting questions here today. So, and thank you for that. By the way, if you do have any other questions or anything that comes to mind that you'd feel like you'd like to have talked about on this show, send them over. Next week, I launch into loving kindness for others. And so we cultivated loving kindness for ourselves primarily in this last week. And then next week we'll focus on sending loving kindness to loved ones, people we don't know, and people we don't like, which can be quite challenging and very rich. Okay. I think I've talked enough about all that. So again, I'll ring the bell. I'll just do a brief silent meditation, and then I'll go into these questions. Okay, so I had one question come in regards to visualization, and if is visualization necessary for the practices of the Brahma Viharas. In particular, I believe the question was about when we did the energy transmutation practice, visualizing the light coming out through the body and so forth. The visualization is, in that practice or in any practice, that visualization is recommended by the guide or by the teacher. The visualization is an accessory. It's not necessary to actually see the images in your mind's eye, or to see them. Some people do visualizations with the eyes open. I find that quite difficult, but if you do do it that way. It's not necessary to see them in any way, eyes closed or open. But it's really, the idea is to allow yourself to feel what's being suggested in the visualization. So in the next, what we'll be doing is visualizing a loved one. Well, I'll guide visualizing a loved one, and then we send that loving kindness to the loved one. It's quite a beautiful practice. But if visualization comes difficult, you can just say the loved one's name a few times, perhaps get a feel for what their presence might feel like during the meditation. And then offering the may you be happy, may you be healthy, and so forth, going through the phrases, offering it to the loved one. Whether we can actually see them in the mind's eye, or get a feel for them, or just maybe get a feel for what their life would be like if they were happy all of the time, or if they were completely healthy. And same when we bring loving kindness to ourselves, it's not necessary that we actually visualize what our life would be like if the world could open to us just as we are. But maybe just feel what that would feel like if you could go through your life and everybody saw you just as you are, everybody welcomed you just as you are, what that would feel like. I love that phrase. It's so rich and extraordinary. Anyway, I digress. So visualization, not really necessary for the practice. It does make the practice, I think, quite accessible. But really, it's more about the feeling in the body, feeling in the mind, feeling in the heart. Now, if this is your first time practicing visualization meditation, it might take a week or so for the mind to get used to meditating with that sort of creative mind activated. Many people only know meditation through the practice of mindfulness, because it's so popular nowadays, particularly in the West, the practice of mindfulness. In that practice, we practice just feeling the breath primarily, and then watching the thoughts come and go. So coming into a meditation, if one has practiced only mindfulness for some time, they might find it quite difficult to come into a meditation, feel the breath, and then actually engaging the creative aspect of the mind to create a visualization in the mind to access loving kindness. That might be quite difficult, and just something that needs to be practiced. Just like drawing needs to be practiced, or any sort of creative endeavor could require some practice to really get it moving, to get it happening. Same with visualization in a meditation. So be patient with yourself. If you've just done it one or two times and you find it difficult to call into mind a visualization of a loved one, or a visualization of yourself spreading light out from your body to fill the room, it can require some getting used to and some practice. So I would say give it a week or so before you say, well, that practice really isn't for me. And that brings me to another question that I received. Why are there so many different types of meditation? And in the Tibetan tradition alone, there are hundreds of different types of meditation. And part of the reason is that there's no one size fits all. If any teacher tells you that this meditation is good for everyone, it probably means they're trying to sell you on something. There's no one meditation that fits everyone. And so there are these many different types of meditation, just for the same reason Baskin-Robbins makes 51 flavors of ice cream. So are there many types of meditation, because there are many different ways of seeing the world. And meditation practices are really more or less designed to free us from a distorted view of our world, to untie that distortion or to release that distortion so we can see our world, our life, our reality in a more accurate way. That's more or less the purpose of most meditation practices. Now, because each of us, actually, 8 billion, 9 billion, however many people there are in the world, we all have a different perspective of life. And so that's so many different ways that we could fall into a distortion, or so many different ways we could fall into a misperception. And meditation practices can change and vary 7 billion, 8 billion, 9 billion times. So it's that's a lot, and that might sound daunting at first, but let me kind of qualify that by a phrase that I read in the Dalai Lama's books, The Art of Happiness, which, by the way, is an amazing book, and I do recommend it. Beautiful, beautiful read, The Art of Happiness. It's actually written by a psychologist who becomes very good friends with the Dalai Lama through a series of interviews, and then writes this book as a kind of a psychological profile of the Dalai Lama. Beautiful book, and at the end of the book, the interviewer, I think his name was Thomas Cutler, if I'm not mistaken, he asks the Dalai Lama, he says, what do you think the future of Buddhism looks like now that Buddhism, and in particular mindfulness, is being ushered into the West? What is the new face of Buddhism? The Dalai Lama said something really quite extraordinary. He said, eventually I think there won't be any more Buddhism. And he said that he hopes eventually there won't be any organized religion, that each person will have their own religious practice that speaks to their own heart. And we can all pray and meditate and practice side by side. Beautiful. And really an extraordinary statement for one of the world's great leaders of religion. So I'm kind of speaking in that way, speaking from that view, that meditation practice can really be that individualized like that. Now, there are schools of meditation, and we all, go to a particular school or practice a particular practice, but eventually the student must make that practice his own and find his own voice within that practice. And that's what a good teacher is really helping to facilitate in the students, is the possibility for them to find their own voice within the teachings that are being given. I think that's quite important. So yes, there are many, many, many different types of meditation practices. And I mentioned in Tibet, hundreds and hundreds of different meditations coming out of Tibet. That's a bit of a different situation. They have all of these meditations in Tibet because there's a particular curriculum that practitioners go through, starting with the very primary practices and moving through practices on death and dying, on impermanence, on change, meditating on what's called the 6 realms of existence, breaking habitual reactive patterns, and all the way through what I'm offering here, the Brahma Viharas, loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And then they culminate with the practices of insight. So a beautiful curriculum, which can take years and years for a practitioner to get through. But in Tibet, there's no hurry, because if you don't get it all right this time, you come back next time and you go at it again. So, okay. So I think I've spoken enough about those two questions, the issues with visualization, why are there so many different types of meditation techniques. And then I had a question about the thinking mind. And what do I do? My mind is so overridden with thoughts, I can't seem to meditate. Is meditation productive? And I've never met somebody who couldn't meditate, but it really, first it takes an acceptance of the thinking mind. And everybody's mind is overthinking, particularly if we've never meditated before or we're new to meditation. It's going to feel like that mind is going 1,000,000 miles an hour. There's a thought after thought after thought after thought after thought. And I've had students tell me once, when they use my technique, which I'll give in a moment, of saying thinking, labeling the thinking with the word thinking, it was for them like a machine gun, thinking, shooting down each thought as it arose, like that. Now, the good news is that if you've even noticed how active the mind is in the silence of meditation, that's a success. That is your awareness looking into the thinking mind, and that's meditation. So you're already meditating. Now, it might feel quite uncomfortable, but that discomfort arises because we have this preconception that whenever we meditate, our mind should be still. That somehow when we ring the meditation bell, that meditation bell somehow magically cleanses our mind of thoughts. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. And so it really requires a lot of self-compassion. This is the human condition. We are all inflicted with this overthinking mind. It's absolutely normal. And sometimes it takes quite some time, quite some practice to start to sense that there's a space in between each thought. And that space, as one of my teachers likes to say, just fine enough to get a hair through, but it's there. And so what I recommend is that whenever you notice that your mind is distracted by thoughts, just saying the word thinking to yourself. And if you've listened to any of my teachings before, you might have heard me talk about this. It's something I keep coming back to time and time again because it's so useful. So you find your mind is, okay, let's start from the beginning. The bell rings, you're feeling the breath at the nose, everything's quiet. And then the mind is, oh, I really need to walk the dog after this. I should have walked the dog before. I wonder if he's hungry. I hope he's not hungry. He really liked those eggs I cooked yesterday. I should make the dog eggs. Maybe I'll make the dog eggs. Well, I should call my brother. He's got that really weird dog that barks all the time. I wonder what they're doing. Oh, I'm thinking. Then you say the word thinking to yourself. That thought will dissolve. That whole train of thoughts will dissolve. The thoughts dissolve because when you're in a thought train like that, you're unaware. You're not feeling the breath anymore. You're not aware that you're supposed to be meditating. You're just identified with those thoughts. When you say the word thinking, that brings the awareness, that brings an aware state to the state of unawareness. Those states can't coexist. So the unawareness dissolves quite effortlessly. You don't have to push the thoughts away. There's no effort. You just say thinking. That thought train will dissolve. Now, there's probably, there might be just a moment of silent space there after that thought dissolves. You say thinking, that thought dissolves. There might be a breath of silence. There might be 2 breaths of silence. There might be 5, there might be 10. It really doesn't matter how short or long the silence is. The important part is to recognize that it's there. And then the mind says, oh, right, and what am I going to cook for dinner tonight? Well, I should really, maybe invite my sister over for dinner with her husband, her new husband. They really seem like a nice couple. I'm glad they're getting along so well. I'm thinking. that thought dissolves. Then you rest. Then probably another thought's coming up right after that, and that's normal. That is meditation practice. So there's nothing wrong with having a lot of thoughts. Very normal, very natural, the mind wants to think. The problem is that we think we shouldn't have a lot of thoughts when we do. That's where the conflict is. That's where the tension is in meditation. And so the idea is to just rest into that experience. This is the way my mind is today. There's a lot of thoughts. There is a gap in between the thoughts. And the more you experience that pattern of thinking, coming back, thinking, coming back, the more you do that, it's like you're lifting weights. You're strengthening the muscle of awareness and attention each time you go through that pattern. And so if there's a lot of thoughts, that you can, in a way, you can feel gratitude for the amount of thoughts, because that's your workout. Each time you go through that process, you're getting a little bit stronger in your awareness and attention. Thinking, another thought, thinking. And before long, your awareness and attention muscles will be so strong that you'll be able to rest in that silence in between the thoughts. We cultivate that heightened sense of awareness and attention, and with that heightened, strengthened awareness and attention, it gets easier to sense the space in between the thoughts, the silence in between the thoughts. So again, I've never met anybody whose mind wasn't workable. And I've worked with a lot of people. and there's always a way of if you just say thinking in between each thought, it's almost like a crowbar or a shoehorn. You're wedging in between the thoughts, and then you pull apart the thoughts, and that silence, that space comes up from in between the thoughts, like that. So no worries about having an overthinking mind or having a mind that's filled with thoughts. Everyone does. It's just the normal, natural state of the human mind at this point in our evolution. But that's why we meditate, to try to bring a sense of peace, a sense of serenity within the thinking mind, like that. Okay. And another question that I got, this is a totally different topic, and it actually, the question stemmed from kind of an interesting personal question. Why do I have a shaved head? And because I'm not a monk, the question ended with, you're not a monk, why do you have a shaved head? Well, I actually lived as a monk for some time, but I'm not a monk any longer. And I was shaving my head actually before I lived in the monastery. I just like it. I like it. I used to actually, once upon a time, I had really long hair. It was down to my waist, if you can imagine that. And that was in my early college days. And I went right from that to this, which was kind of a jump. And I've gone back and forth. I've had hair. I sometimes shave it. I sometimes grow it out. But I think the question was really pointing at the idea of monasticism and why do monks shave their head? And if it wasn't pointing at that, well, that's where I'm going to go with it anyway. So there you go. So the idea of a shaved head in monasticism is a dedication to renunciation, giving up attachments. Now, it's quite interesting because many aspects of renunciation become attachments themselves. So now monks have to have their head shaved, which is an attachment. So that's quite ironic, right? And any of the have-tos in life are attachments, right? So the real idea behind renunciation is to release the attachment to something, not the something itself. So if I renunciate material goods, it's not that I have to give my car, my house, my clothes, my possessions away, but I have to give up my attachment to those things. Just like I said with my shaved head, I could have hair or I could shave. Really, it's irrelevant to me. I'm not attached to it. So in that way, I have renounced any hairstyle at all. I'm not attached to being celibate. But I'm really happy. I have a partner now, speaking personally. Very happy in that relationship. But I was also single for many, many years. And I was also very happy being single. So my happiness is not dependent on whether I have a relationship, whether I'm celibate, or whether I'm not in a relationship. It's irrelevant. So I've renounced my attachment to any particular form of personal relationship. I'm really happy in solitude, being alone. Love it. But I'm also really happy around people, in crowds. Love it. So I've renounced in that form, in that way. Not attached to being alone. I'm not attached to being in a crowd. I can be socializing and I can be alone in quarantine for 30 days. I'm happy. So that's the idea behind renunciation. And it's become quite different in a monastic setting. It's one of the reasons why I left the monastery, was because I found that I could live a very happy, full life, practicing meditation, studying these texts that I study as much as I want, more than I could in the monastery. And I could practice renunciation. I'm not attached. Now there are a few things that I'm attached to. I love teaching. And I'm probably attached to teaching in some form or another. It makes me so happy to teach these wisdom teachings, the perennial wisdoms, in a secular fashion, and to see receiving benefit from the voice that I'm giving to these timeless teachings. So perhaps I'm attached there. I don't know yet. I haven't had to remove myself from that and feel if I feel suffering from that, if that happens. But I probably would. I probably would. And I've played it in my mind, what happens if I have to stop teaching as a result of this pandemic. That would be really challenging for me. So maybe I'm not completely 100% renunciant, but I'm a layperson. So there you go. I don't have to be. But basically that's the idea behind renunciation and behind the shaved head, or behind giving up things as a spiritual practitioner. It's not the things we're giving up, it's the attachment. And I'll just close with kind of a nice story here. So you're probably all familiar with the image of the big fat Buddha, right? Comes from China. Showed up in China probably around the 1st or 2nd century AD, as Buddhism was just kind of making its mark in China. We saw this big fat Buddha, probably as a result of, China was in famine at that time. There was a lot of starvation that was happening. And so what better way to bring interest into a practice? We have this Buddha who's huge and clearly well-fed and can afford to feed himself in this way, so you should practice with us. Okay, anyway, I digress. That's the origin of the fat Buddha. So here we have this big fat Buddha, and the story is that he's walking down the street in China carrying a sack of gold. And he's skipping down the street so happy, carrying this sack of gold. And somebody says to him, "Hey, you're a Buddha. Why are you so happy with your sack of gold? That's strange for the teachings on Buddhism that teach this idea of renunciation." And the fat Buddha drops the sack of gold and he starts skipping down the street just as happy. And another man stops him and says, "Hey, you've just lost all of that money. How come you're so happy?" And the big fat Buddha just skips back to the sack of gold and picks it up and puts it back on his shoulder and skips along the way, like that. And so that's really the idea of renunciation. We're happy, we can enjoy the things we have, beautiful. We have a nice house, a nice car, we have nice clothes. That's fine. We don't find our identification in that. Our personality doesn't depend on those things. Our sense of happiness or joy doesn't depend on those things. We can enjoy them while we have them, but when they go, they go. And we're still just as happy, and we still are just as much embracing and enjoying life, whether they're here or they're gone. Okay, that's all I have time for today. Questions, I love Q&A, and I welcome those. So do send any questions you might like to have addressed here in the series on the Brahma Viharas, whether they have to do with loving kindness or Brahma Viharas or not. So you can send those over. Tomorrow starts loving kindness for others. And I think we'll start with loving kindness for ourselves and for a loved one, like that. And we'll go systematically through maybe a few days each, loved one, then a stranger, then someone we don't like, and then we'll send it out to the entire world. So we really have a couple more weeks on loving kindness, which is beautiful. Really hard to find a better way to spend a couple of weeks. On a more serious note, please do practice your social distancing. Wash your hands. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Stay clean. Wear your masks. Apparently, the mask thing was grossly underrated in the West. But do wear your masks. And apparently, that's keeping a lot of people safer than before. And we'll get through this together. So thanks again for tuning in to Brahma Viharas Q&A. We'll see you tomorrow. Much love.